As a kid growing up in the UK in the 1990s, the films of Abel Ferrara seemed like forbidden fruit. The poster for Bad Lieutenant hung in the video store like a tantalizing flashing light, with its red warning on the bottom right of the poster: "This video contains material some viewers may find offensive." Unable to rent the video because of its age restriction, I was amazed when my father brought the video into the house after buying it from a local petrol station with gas points, only to be shut down when he said after his initial viewing, "This movie's a bit too rough for you, son. You can watch it when you get a bit older." I was absolutely furious, as my father never held back in letting me watch movies, as he considered a lot of them to be art, and always taught me as a young boy that movies were created things and not for real. Looking back now, I think this is where my fascination with the work of Abel Ferrara began, as it seemed to a young film enthusiast in the early 90s that his work was the apple hanging on that forbidden tree. Shortly after this, I began to watch all of Ferrara's work that I could get my hands on. Even as a young film enthusiast, I believed what I still believe today, and that is the best way to understand a filmmaker is to watch their whole filmography, from first work to most recent work if you can. As I find that it is usually the early works of an independent filmmaker that show their development and truly show you what drives them and what their core values as filmmakers are. With Ferrara, I found out pretty quickly, after viewing his early works, especially the notorious video nasty The Driller Killer released in '79, that he and his crew were first and foremost a band of artists, and that he himself was very much at the center of his work. Ferrara himself has said that Driller Killer is a kind of documentary about who he and his crew were and their lives in New York at the time. A band of artists, a band of brothers and sisters. This theme of writing about the things you know best, beginning with the self, seems to be a reoccurring theme in the filmmakers I admire, such as Paul Schrader's personal themes of self-induced loneliness in Taxi Driver, or the fear of violence that lies dormant in us all in the films of Sam Peckinpah, such as his very personal masterpiece Straw Dogs. Filmmakers that take this very personal approach are using the media of film as a tool of self-therapy. Filmmakers like Paul Schrader, for example, have put forward theories that screenwriting is a form of therapeutic practice. I genuinely believe that Driller Killer is a form of self-styled documentary about the journey of a young artist discovering himself. Eventually, after seeing that I had watched almost all of Ferrara's back catalogue, my father caved in and allowed me to watch Bad Lieutenant. To this day, it still remains one of my favourite films. It is an unflinching personal statement from Ferrara, and one that deserves a whole discussion of its own. The next film of Ferrara's that I saw after Bad Lieutenant was Body Snatchers from 1992. I was already a huge fan of the original film adaptation by Don Segal made in 1956. And I also really liked Philip Kaufman's adaptation from 1978 as well. Both of these movies really stand the test of time and still remain expertly made films to this day. Even at a young age watching these films, I could tell that they had a message, and that the subtext of both films was a comment on the times in which they were made. Watching these films over the years astounds me, as they never seem to age. Like all good art, they are socially relevant to any political climate or any state of world order they are viewed in, as they contain such core relevancy to what it means to be human. A quote from the original film's protagonist, Dr. Miles Burnell, played wonderfully by Kevin McCarthy, states, we harden our hearts and become callous. Only when we have to fight to stay human do we realize how important it is. A statement like that really helped a young boy like me to make some sense of the world when I was growing up. It was a time of the Gulf War conflict, and then eventually my teenage generation's war, the war in Iraq. Jack Finney's original serial, and then novel on which the film adaptations of the Body Snatchers were based, is a fine read, and one of my favourite drama sci-fi books I have ever read. After seeing Don Segal's version of the film, I had found the novel in my secondary school library. A great library is one of the things I am most thankful for from my school days. I spent many early morning hours, afternoons and breaks in there, reading the likes of Philip K. Dick, Brian Aldiss and Aldous Huxley. Finney's novel is overflowing with ideas about culture, social comments, and personal development. Dr. Bennell's character is a man who was at odds with himself to begin with, even before the attack of the pod people begins. He almost hates who he is. He dislikes the fact he is living in his father's shadow, who was the town doctor before him. He is tired of his patients interrupting his personal life, as he is a doctor on constant call. And most of all, he doesn't want to fall in love again, as his first marriage was a failure, and he is terrified of feeling as a man again. The attack of the pod people is almost like a rebirth for Dr. Bennell, as in the midst of fighting off an attack of beings who want to take over his body and soul, he is already, in a metaphorical sense, finding out who he truly is and being born again. There are Finney's thoughts on technology and how it affects all our lives. Mobile phones, now an almost cybernetic attachment to our bodies, are precursed when Finney talks about the abolishment of the phone operator, as self-rotary dialing was a new thing at the time of the novel. Similar to today's cashiers or bank tellers being replaced by machines, Finney states, "Sometimes, I think we are refining all humanity out of our lives." Here I think Finney is talking about the modern world and how we are all becoming emotionless pod people without the need of an enemy from above to lead us in that direction. If we cease to see the human elements and interactions in life as precious, then we become automated and emotionless. If we don't progress as individuals, the whole world dies. Just like the town of Santa Mira in the book slowly dies as its citizens become emotionless pod people. The novel also has an environmental message, which Ferreira would pick up on in his 1990s version. A pod person talks to Dr. Bennell when trying to get him to succumb peacefully to being taken over by a pod, and gives a chilling description of the human race, using the killing of the buffalo as an example. In essence, calling human beings a tragic race, as we hunted the animal to the point of extinction, simply because we could. A terrifying thought, more horrifying than any invading alien force could possibly ever be. After seeing Abel Ferrara's adaptation of the Body Snatchers, it very quickly became my favourite of the first three adaptations. Not just my favourite of the adaptations, but my favourite film to watch at that time. I bought the video and viewed it almost religiously. There was just something about it that drew me in. I was a teenager at the time, and the title character of Marty was around my age. So I guess that was an instant entry point for me into the movie. Body Snatchers is to me one of the formative films of my teenage years. The atmosphere and raw emotions of the movie just seemed so real to me at the time. It was like Ferreira had created the perfect movie about being a teenager. I guess I can compare it to the way some people talk about the teenage films of John Hughes or Kevin Smith informing their youth, and getting who they are. I was just the right age for that movie, for it to have a huge impact on me. So much so, that I could see so much of myself reflected in the character of Marty. The music Marty listens to is the same kind of depressing teenage melancholic rock that I used to listen to. The friends she meets are the same archetypes as friends I had. The argument she has with her father about staying out too late and underage drinking, these are all the things that most of, if not all, teenagers of my socio-economic group can relate to. It was a movie about transformation. Not just society transforming into pod people, but about a teen coming of age and realizing that society is turning into something vile. And worst of all, society is something that can be conformist and unconcerned with the individual. Myself being a young man interested in the arts and especially film, I seemed so different to society and all my friends. And combining that with the hormones of growing up, I just gelled with this movie, and it became an artwork that I felt like I could relate to 100%. In the movie, Marty is forced to confront and destroy her family life. She moves on, meets a boy, and starts, in essence, a new family. After the transformation, albeit a horrifying but yet necessary one for Marty to find a direction and footing in the world after she is forced to transform from a young girl into an adult, felt very similar to my own journey in becoming a young man. And I guess that's why I relate to this film as being my ultimate teenage movie. I guess there are lots of ratings that one can assess from watching Abel Ferrara's Body Snatchers. There are many fine books by academics and fans of Ferreira'S work. Some see the film as a representation of Hiroshima, war atrocities, and a look at the destruction that we as humans cast upon our planet. And in reading the literature, I can totally relate. While others see the film's military setting as a representation of the faceless robots that some believe the military turns young men and women into. But for me, maybe because of the age I was and the time that I saw it, this movie is about growing up. It's about meeting that special someone who has your back, be it a friend or a lover, and facing the very uncertain and violent world with them after severing ties with the family unit and going it alone. Perhaps famous critic Kim Newman put it right when discussing Kaufman's 78 version of the story, when he said, "Each film represents the time it is in, but I think the films have universal timeless themes. You see in the films what you bring to them." Kim's statement seems to ring 100% true. Like all good art, you take from the work what you bring to it, and by viewing it and relating to it, in the process of understanding what you have brought to it, you will hopefully learn something new about yourself in the process. This is why I love Ferreira'S version. It helped me through my teenage years and gave me a stick by which to measure my own life and what I was going through. For a while, Body Snatchers was lost in obscurity, as Warner Brothers didn't really do much in advertising the film, but it has now rightly taken its place among the classic horror thrillers of the 1990s. Body Snatchers has been to date Ferreira'S biggest budget film of $20 million, second to the budget of $6 million that he had when he worked on Fear City of 1985, a criminally underseen dark slasher movie. When talking about the budget on Body Snatchers, Ferreira seemed to have an amazing nonchalant attitude and outlook, being quoted as saying, "I've made big budget movies like it before, and I was the first person to be offered Die Hard. If I can get a film made of just close-ups of Harvey Keitel like in The Bad Lieutenant, then I don't need $17 million. If I'm working with 1,000 extras and helicopters like in Body Snatchers, then I do." This attitude toward the money side of things once again brings out the artist side of Ferreira that we saw in his late 70s and early 80s movies. His artist's attitude is simple. If you want to paint a bigger canvas, then you simply need more paint. And the rest of it, the studio involvement, and the larger crews, doesn't seem to faze Ferreira at all. He is a truly confident director who simply wants what is best for his and his crew's vision. Body Snatchers is a visually stunning film to look at too, and the cinematography by King of New York and China Girl DP and soon-to-be Hollywood regular Bojan Bazelli is outstanding and original. Ferreira commented on the look of the film, "It looks fabulous, and it's shot in scope. It's state-of-the-art in motion pictures, and with $70 million at my disposal, I could well afford it. Much of the movie was shot at night and backlit. Warner's was unhappy with this because you couldn't see the actors' eyes. They asked for reshoots. But that was a conscious artistic decision on my part. Even with a big studio like Warner's, it seems that Ferreira still maintains that independent street-style attitude of this is what I'm going to do, whether the studio likes it or not. Sticking with his artist-filmmaker's roots that began with his early work in the 70s. In an interview with The Hollywood Reporter, Ferrara talked about his artistic vision for the Body Snatchers and how it was affected by studio involvement. I'm not giving up my vision of the film for anybody or anything. It was tough. I actually didn't have final cut on that film, and that was the last one that I didn't have it. This seems to be the case for many independent filmmakers who go on to work with higher budgets and bigger studio involvements. Famously with David Lynch disowning his film of Dune after studio interference, George A. Romero clashing with studios who took a cinematographer's word over his own as director on The Dark Half, and John Carpenter losing work on directing Firestarter after the studio's disappointment with the box office performance of his film The Thing. After these clashes, most of these directors would never go on to make another film with major studio backing. As in the case with Ferrara, favouring independent creative freedom over larger budgets or higher salaries. This creative drive and passion is what makes Ferreira's work stand out for me. He is truly one in a million and a creative force to be reckoned with. He is fearless as a director, and this still shows in his unique and increasingly personal films. Ferreira's Body Snatchers is one hell of a studio movie. It looks great, sounds great, and shares with me a part of my life that helped shape the guy I am today. I'd like to finish off by going back to a quote from Finney's original story, which I think sums up the teenage alienation and feelings that I felt I had in common with this film. It helped me to see that, as Dr. Bonnell's character puts it in the novel, the town I was born in, I no longer belong.